In this video, I'll be talking about how to tell a short story about yourself. My name is Tobey from Training Business Pros. Thank you for joining me. There's a couple of reasons why you want to learn to tell stories about you. First reason is stories are memorable. You want to leave people with a great impression of you, then give them a story because they'll remember that long before they'll remember any of the facts and figures that you give them. And number two, ETR, or earn the right. When you tell a story about yourself and your experience, it tends to help you earn the right to talk about the things that you're talking about. And I have a three-part formula that is extremely powerful in telling a great story. And we're going to dive into it right after this. Okay, so I have this three-part formula that I've used to tell my story and to tell the stories of other people over the years. It's an extremely powerful formula. Please stick around for all three parts. You're going to want to hear every single moment of this because you're going to love it and it's going to work really well for you. Okay, instead of part one, we're going to call this act one. So this is the three-act storytelling play, just like a movie. So act one is establish the plot and introduce the characters. So the plot is things like overcoming the monster, or rags to riches, or a comedy, or a tragedy, the quest, voyage and return. There's a bunch of different plots. In my particular case, I usually use the rags to riches story. And as I'm going to tell this, I'm going to share a little bit about myself just to give you an example. And part of that example is also introducing the characters. So I'm a preacher's kid. My father was a United Church minister. And one day when I was 8 years old, I fell asleep in the balcony because, my father's sermons sometimes put me to sleep. I was 8 years old. And after church was over, I woke up abruptly to this really loud sounding organ. It was beautifully dissonant and really wonderful. And I thought, oh my God, I need to get closer to this. So I ran down 3 flights of stairs, through the bottom of the church, up the ramp, up the 2 flights to the top of the choir loft, then down the stairs. And I moved up beside the organist. His name was Markwell J. Perry. And Mark was a great organist and a great piano player. And I said to him, Mark, can you teach me how to play like that? And he said, no. And I'm like, well, why not? And he goes, because your legs are too short, you can't reach the pedals. How about we start you on piano first? And I'm like, that sounds good. Can you talk to my dad for me? He goes, sure. I started piano the next week and I never stopped practicing for the next 35 years. So what did I do there? I introduced the characters and the plot of the story. It's around music and growth. And what I did for the next 35 years was practice, practice, practice. Okay, let's move on to act two. In act two, what you want to do is escalate the confrontation and embellish the struggle. So like any movie, it's like, where does the villain show up and what goes wrong? And you want to explain how the struggle is increasing and the problems are getting bigger. Explain how the old solution was inadequate. So let me give you an example of this. After practicing for several years and going through university in music, I became a professional musician. And essentially, I practiced that trade for like 23 years. And my wife and I spent a lot of time getting gigs, touring, getting recording contracts, putting out albums. And we had a great time doing it. We saw a lot of the world, 17 different countries, and made a lot of music and had some fans. And it was really great. But the problem is, and you may be familiar with the fact that music is not the most lucrative profession on the planet. And around the year 2001, after 9/11, I woke up with this loud ringing in my ears called tinnitus. Some of you may be familiar with that. And it was deafening. And I suspect that it had a lot to do with being around music my whole life and playing the grand piano with the lid open and having drummers ride cymbals in my ear. And it was really hard for me. Shortly after that, I also developed tendinitis from overplaying the piano. And by this time in my life, I'm approaching 40 and my financial prospects are not that great. I couldn't perform. My head was driving me crazy. My arms were driving me crazy. And when you're not playing, you're not getting paid. And things were getting really bad. And eventually my wife and I actually went almost broke. Actually, I think we were broke. So we basically left Toronto, moved into the country for a couple of months with my parents, lived in my parents' house for a little while, and then eventually bought this really inexpensive house that we fixed up and I renovated with my bare hands because I needed a project and something to do, and just started to sort of rebuild my life. And I really didn't know what I was going to do with the rest of my life. So I started reading a bunch of books. Thank God I had some people like Laurie Rosenfield who fed me book after book and helped me sort of recognize that there was just a lot of things that I didn't know yet about success and how to create that. And then eventually I picked up a book called The Pilgrimage, which was written by Paulo Coelho about his journey across Spain on the Camino de Santiago. And I actually went and walked that journey. Took a couple of months to do that, just to kind of figure out what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. All right, so you see from Act 2, I'm basically talking about my struggles and transitioning out of the music business and who did I learn from and what did I read and all of that. So that's part of Act 2. You really want to, again, escalate the confrontation and embellish the struggle. All right, finally, Act 3. Act 3 is what we call the epic battle and the new normal. So in any movie, this is where during Act 2, you went through that transition phase and you learned how to defeat the monster because the old solution was inadequate. What is the new solution? So the new solution for me was educating myself, taking training courses, reading a lot about successful people and how they created success in their lives. And when I got back from Europe, I immediately started a business called Success Tracks for Artists to help other artists and musicians get a recording contract, learn how to build a website, learn how to sell their music from the stage. Because I didn't really have any experience in business, I couldn't really help people start businesses or talk about that. I talk about that now all the time because in about 2004, I started training business pros, and now I help businesses all over the place. And I'm an executive consultant, and I do a lot of digital marketing strategies. Essentially, over the last 16 years, I have learned that if you help enough people get what they want, you can kind of have what you want. And that's what I do. I basically have ran several thousand people through my training business. I have helped hundreds of companies develop new strategies for marketing. And all of that was as a result of myself learning and transitioning and building my own business. Because I don't think you can help somebody else do something if you haven't made the mistakes yourself and haven't succeeded yourself. All right, so that's Act 3, the epic battle and the new normal. The new normal, talk a little bit about where you are now, some of the things that you've accomplished, what life is like now after all of that transition period. And so if you're looking to tell a short story about yourself, try to remember these 3 elements. Number 1, the first act is establish the plot, introduce the characters. Act 2, escalate the confrontation and embellish the conflict. And Act 3, the epic battle and the new normal. And that's really how to tell a story. Think about the opportunities that you could do this. For example, your next public speaking engagement, your next Zoom presentation, your next presentation to the board. Maybe you want to truncate it a little bit and make it a little tighter than that. But essentially, those 3 parts really help people walk away with a sense of who you are and what are your core values. Because obviously, as you're sharing your story, people will not only relate to what you're saying, and many times they'll come up and say, wow, we have almost the same story. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. But they'll really walk away with a sense of who you are, and that's what they'll remember long after they forget every fact and figure and number and statistic that you gave them. I hope this was helpful to you. I call it the 3-act play. Use it. It works great. Thanks so much for watching. It's Paul Tobey here. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. When you do, it lets us know your level of interest and will help us create more content just like this for you and other people just like you. If you have any questions or comments about the content, please post them below and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks for your time.